I've been waiting a long time to do this video. There used to be a saying in comics which went something like this: no one stays dead except for Bucky Barnes, Jason Todd, and Uncle Ben. Given the fact that enough time has passed that this statement now only applies to one of the three, it should be indicative of how death is treated in the medium as a whole. Unlike most other forms of media, comics, especially those published by DC and Marvel, are meant to be published indefinitely. This often translates to no definitive end for a character, as it's not exactly easy to wrap things up with a "and they lived happily ever after" when they have to immediately get back to business with the next issue. This is further compounded by the fact that multiple people are working on a single title, by which I mean after a creative team writes, say, a 20-issue run on a character, carefully concluding all the plot points they set up with satisfactory endings, the next creative team could just take the character in such a direction that would undo all the work done by the previous team. Reasons, well, there are plenty of them: fan backlash, a media adaptation of the character, orders from the higher ups, the same character appearing in multiple titles, etc. This indefinite nature ends up also leaving an impact on how the phenomenon of death works in the medium. While recognizing that in the fictional world of comics you can tell literally any story possible, the need for the books to keep going on has kind of accelerated the way death works in comics. In real life, death is shocking, heartbreaking, and final, leaving those left behind with a sense of loss. When we feel strongly for a character, their death leaves an impact on us too. Except if these characters are popular and have fans who love them, they'll be brought back. And yes, the first time it happens, we are overjoyed. Our hero is back to save the day. Oh no, this dangerous threat was thought to be gone forever and the heroes barely scraped a win last time. Now they're back and even stronger than before. And then it happens again, and again, and again, and again, and again, and again. And there is only so much that the fans can take, or will take. Recently, as I'm writing this script, DC Comics announced that in Justice League number 75 of the recent run, 9 heroes out of the following would die: Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Jon Stewart, Martian Manhunter, Hawkgirl, Aquaman, Green Arrow, Black Canary, and Zatanna. This would be done as a homage to the story Death of Superman, and don't worry, we'll definitely be touching on that comic later on, right down to matching the number of the issue in which the Man of Steel had fallen after battling Doomsday. The response to this has been extremely and vocally negative. While I believe personally that there's probably a story there somewhere, years of characters dying and getting resurrected has left everyone with a feeling of apathy. Something I am definitely feeling as well. Hell, Wonder Woman only returned to the land of the living a few months ago. So, how did we get to this point? Well, let's find out by looking at how the phenomenon of comic book death developed throughout the ages. Quick side note, I will not be covering every single death/resurrection that has ever happened in DC or Marvel history, as this would drive me completely insane. Instead, I will look at a few key examples which I believe have left a huge impact on the medium. If you feel there was a death or return that you think had an impact, either momentary or lasting, feel free to let me know in the comments below. While this probably isn't the first death and resurrection to take place in comic book history, it is one of the most well remembered earliest examples, especially because of the fact that the death and subsequent resurrection took place in separate issues. Lightning Lad, founding member of futuristic superhero group Legion of Superheroes with fairly self explanatory powers, dies in Adventure Comics number 34, saving Saturn Girl, who is another founder, a telepath, by the way, and his love interests. To twist the knife, Saturn Girl had been trying her best to make sure that none of the other Legionnaires would die in this mission, and she ended up losing the one closest to her. After a few issues pass, during which the team mourns the loss of their fallen friend, in Adventure Comics number 312, they figure out a way to bring him back to life, which involves holding a specialized lightning rod, which on being struck by lightning would bring back Lightning Lad at the cost of the wielder's life. All the members of the Legion agree to participate to this, each holding one rod and leaving the matter of who would die up to fate. While the idea clearly is to show that the Legion are devoted to one another, I have to admit, seeing a bunch of kids participating in what could be considered a death pact is kinda disturbing, but maybe I'm just reading too much into it. And because it wouldn't be narratively satisfactory if someone like Sunboy died, the lightning hits Saturn Girl, killing her at the cost of bringing her boyfriend back to life. Except, no, that didn't happen, with it being revealed that Chameleon Boy's pet Brody had shapeshifted into her. Why the creature did it is not something I feel ready to tackle right now. If you are feeling curious, Google 5 years later Legion of Superheroes annual number 3 with my warning, and the two lovers are reunited. This story, unlike the rest of the examples that are about to follow, is unique, not just for dealing with the idea of bringing back someone from the dead, not for taking several issues to complete the story, even introducing Lightning Lad's sister Lightning Lass, yes, seriously, but because it was all part of the creative team's plan. At least that's what I guess. So what happens when the creative team have a dispute over a character? Well, that's a great way to segue into our next example, which also happens to be a Legion of Superheroes example. It all began a long time ago, when then teen savant Jim Shooter decided that he wanted to reveal that new Legionnaire Ferro Lad was actually black underneath his mask. He had quite the simple reasoning. In the future, this issue of racism would no longer be an issue, so why not? Unfortunately, his idea was shot down hard by the higher-ups at DC, who feared they would lose distribution in the South, a common excuse, if they revealed that the entire cast of a superhero book wasn't whiter than teeth in a toothpaste commercial. Little Jim, still believing in his ideas, even said he'd keep Ferro Lad's mask on, but alas, the character had to be white. And then, like every teenager before and since, Little Jim's ideal worldview was shattered and replaced with a cold, cynical one. And also, just like every teenager before and since, he decided to rebel. And also, like every teenager before and since, the best thing he could do was, to quote a particular Cracked article, break his toys. In case you haven't put it together yet, yeah, the reason Ferro Lad died was because his writer killed him off in a form of rebellion. Yes, his death was suitably heroic, and Jim Shooter was trying his absolute best to fight against an unjust system, but that's what it basically boils down to. this version, don't ask how many versions are there, I will cry, would stay dead, except for that one appearance as a ghost. Again, comic books. But little Jim wasn't quite done yet. He would soon grow up and play a key role in our next example. So, Jean Grey has a bit of a reputation of that hero who keeps dying and coming back. Is this claim really true? Yeah, no, kind of, maybe? Ignoring fake out deaths and stuff like getting snapped by Thanos temporarily, Jean has died a grand total of 2 times, and brought back the same number of times as well. Currently, she is very much alive, whatever that means in this era of the X-Men. The problem with Jean is that her deaths and rebirths have been notable moments, and I'm not even talking about stuff taking place in the comics themselves. The best way to explain this would be by taking the end of the Dark Phoenix saga. The initial plot was going to be about Jean Grey going mad with power, destroying an inhabited solar system while out of control, and being mind wiped to bring her back to normal so that she could freely be a superhero again. No, nothing of that sort would ever happen again. But here, Jim Shooter stepped in. Yes, little Jim had gone from being pushed around by editors at DC to becoming editor-in-chief at Marvel, a job that he took great pleasure in doing. Shooter said that, did I have a moral issue with that? Yes. More than that, it was a character issue. Would Storm sit comfortably at a dinner table with someone who had killed billions as if nothing had ever happened? Nah. And so, Jean died as a sort of compromise between Jim Shooter, who wanted to place her in an intergalactic prison, writer Chris Claremont, who wasn't initially happy to kill off Jean, but did come around on the decision and felt it was good for the story, and artist John Byrne. Now, this part is very difficult to fact check, as this relies on the accounts of several people who did something decades ago and aren't exactly the most charitable towards each other right now. But the problems began with a story done after the Dark Phoenix saga in the pages of Fantastic Four by John Byrne, where Reed Richards saved the life of Galactus. Yes, that Galactus. This got Claremont slightly peeved, as the crime for which his character had to die was perpetuated by Galactus on a regular basis. And not only did Galactus get to live, he was restored to his full powers and left to freely consume planets once again. All these issues sort of came to a head with the announcement of X Factor, an X-Men spin-off book that would feature the original 5 X-Men minus Jean on account of her being dead. But John Byrne had outlined a way to bring back Jean in the pages of his book to Jim Shooter, which I will assume only royally pissed Claremont off further. As a peacekeeping gesture, Jim Shooter decided to have the pages resurrecting Jean be redone while still taking place in an issue of Fantastic Four. And now John Byrne was mad at both Jim Shooter and Chris Claremont. Anyway, if you want to see how that played out, I'll direct you to SF Debris' excellent video series, The Rise and Fall of the Comic Empire, linked in the description below. Meanwhile, for the purpose of this video, let's now move on to Jean's second death. Whatever debates exist around Jim Shooter, at the very least, fans weren't left divided regarding the quality of the books themselves. This was not so much the case with Joe Quesada. To keep a long story short, near the end of Grant Morrison's excellent and innovative new X-Men run, Quesada gave the mandate to kill off Jean Grey. The reasons for this are multiple. One could be that he felt that Scott and Jean's marriage was boring and wanted him to end up with Emma Frost instead. Or Jean was too powerful at this point to write regular stories about, as by the end of the run she had gotten a lot better at handling not only her own powers, but those of the Phoenixes as well. Or he felt that she shouldn't have been resurrected at all in the first place. Regardless of the reason, an execution was ordered, and Grant, who was just done with Marvel at this point, just carried it out. However, before we get to a recent, more permanent resurrection, again, whatever that means in the current era of the X-Men, we need to talk about Phoenix Endsong. In this story, the Phoenix keeps bringing back Jean's shambling corpse back to life. I wonder why she has a reputation of resurrecting multiple times in the minds of fans. And she keeps dying. The story ends with her staying dead, making this story, much like this interlude, completely pointless. The only reason to bring it up here is that Endsong probably was just to play on Jean's reputation on that redhead who keeps dying. Except by playing on that reputation, it further cemented her reputation as such. Finally, in 2018, after Marvel tested the waters with the teenage Jean Grey from the past, Jean was finally brought back to life. And the response was along the lines of, yeah, okay, I guess that might have happened. It's honestly not surprising, considering the sheer number of resurrections taking place in that decade alone and the X-Men's reputation for cheating death so often. It has become difficult to find someone who hasn't died at least once in that franchise. It just wasn't a big deal anymore. Editor and writer Mark Gruenwald loved comics and was often referred to as a walking encyclopedia when it came to the medium. I bring this up just to highlight the fact that he was the one who decided that there were too many lame villains and they needed to go. Which isn't wrong. A single hero will end up spawning around several villains, and for every Joker, there's a Cornelius Stirk, an Abattoir, a Mirage, a Bouncer, a Mr. Camera, a Professor Radium, and a Zeiss. So he created an in-story reason to get rid of them, the Scourge of the Underworld, who would kill off quite a few villains who weren't getting a lot of mileage. Now, to sit here and list off every character killed by the Scourge would be incredibly dumb. Mark would later regret the idea, and I kinda agree. There are many ways to use a character, and you never know the potential of some until they're given a chance. Although quite a few of them ended up getting reinterpreted as losers and dying anyway. So, which one's worse? Getting killed off or being kept alive as a punching bag? You tell me. You knew this was coming. You might have heard the story. The team behind the Superman books had worked painstakingly to plot out a year's worth of stories that would end with the marriage of Superman and Lois Lane in canon for the first time. Unfortunately, a little show called Lois and Clark: The New Adventures of Superman had been picked up by ABC. And then the higher ups thought it would be very poignant to have the characters marry in the comic at the same time they married on the show, flushing all that work down the drain. So when writer and artist Jerry Ordway made his usual joke of, let's just kill him, the other people in the room who normally would have laughed it off as Jerry being Jerry went, you know. Writer Louise Simonson felt that the death of a character would show how much the public actually cared for them. And despite the fact I've heard several people claim that Superman is lame, bro, the sheer response to the story proved Simonson's point quite well. The impact was massive, with mainstream media attention and people mourning in real life for the Man of Tomorrow. In the current day, the reaction to the story remains mixed, with some calling it a publicity stunt, since Superman was always intended to come back, and the process could be duplicated in similar effect with other characters. They're partially right. While Watchmen and Dark Knight Returns are often blamed for the Dark Age of comics, the death of Superman shares equal, if not more, part of the blame for it as well. This story showed publishers that they could get away with killing off anybody before bringing them back at some point. While my personal take is that the story is actually a fun popcorn read, the fact that I just said a story whose primary goal was to kill off Superman was fun probably says a lot about me, and it ain't good. Its overall negative impact on the industry cannot be overlooked. Death as an overall experience is a traumatic one, as those left behind have to struggle with the absence of one they held so dear. To trivialize this reaction to the point of parody hurts the medium greatly, as no matter how much they love a work of fiction, there's only so much one's suspension of disbelief can be stretched before it shatters completely. We will probably continue to see comics like The Death of Superman. There are some comics currently who are trying to approach the idea of comic book death in different ways, like the Krakoa era of the X-Men and the Immortal Hulk saga. But eventually, you just have to give death her due.